We believe that the construction and design of Indian Point is very robust in terms of being able to withstand what could be an expected earthquake in this area.
Not God bless America, God damn America!
They don't get us. They don't get who we are.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you so much for joining us this Thursday evening, May 17th. A lot to cover this hour, but first, we'll start with nuclear power. Some are calling for the closure of a power plant in our region, a plant with more people in a densely populated area than any other power plant in not only the country, but the world. And we sat down with a representative of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and asked the tough questions about the future of Indian Point. And then, right or wrong, if you thought that the questions surrounding President Obama's past connections to the very controversial Reverend Wright were a thing of the long-distant past, you ought to think again. The issue was almost resurrected by a GOP super PAC looking to push Obama out of the White House. But are they resurrecting the right issue, and is such an attack below the belt? And later, unleashing Crazy Joe. Well, we're talking about Joe Biden. He had some very strong words for Mitt Romney yesterday, but is he the right messenger, and is an attack on Mitt the right message? And then majority minority. The face of America's changing population. How will it impact both our economic and our political future? All that and much more. It's coming up on this edition of RFL, but let's begin with that nuclear power, and our own Kim Lengel has been closely watching the developments in Indian Point. She's in first position tonight with the background. Kim?
Well, Rich, critics of Indian Point are saying, among other things, that the plant and its regulators haven't learned any lessons from Fukushima, the nuclear disaster, especially ones that they should have learned. Questions surrounding the evacuation plan, fire safety, its proximity to a fault line, and other safety concerns still loom large. Entergy, which is the owner and operator of Indian Point, has encountered a string of accidents and mishaps since its beginnings. It's even appeared on the federal list of the nation's worst nuclear power plants. The 40-year licenses for the two plants' working reactors are set to expire in 2013 and 2015. Two state powerhouses, the governor and attorney general, say Indian Point should close. That's in addition to the environmental groups and citizen activist groups like Shut Down Indian Point Now.
I understand the power and the benefit. I also understand the risk. And this plant in this proximity to New York City was never a good risk.
Between the two groups have reached ahead when a study commissioned by the mayor's office showed that if Indian Point closed, New Yorkers' energy bills would rise as much as 12%.
If you closed Indian Point down today, we'd have enormous blackouts. There is no alternative to the energy that we get from Indian Point. 4 or 5 years from now, that probably is not going to be true.
The issue of relicensing and safety is going to be a headlining topic tonight during a public open house meeting with the NRC. And Rich, as you know, these meetings can get very heated.
Absolutely. As we both know, Kim, thank you very much. Now, earlier today, I sat down with Bill Dean. He's a regional administrator of the NRC's Office for Region 1. Region 1, it covers most of the northeastern portion of the United States. And Bill's going to be in the hot seat tonight answering questions from residents. But we got a preview of that conversation, a wide-ranging conversation that we had about the future of IP. You're going to see throughout the course of the interview the concerns about the NRC's ability to be objective are legitimized by a lot of what Bill had to say. So here now, the first part of our conversation. I was reading a recent conversation you have that IP possibly, in your words, the most contentious relicensing process the Commission has ever handled. Fairly put?
Fairly put.
Over the years, I've been conflicted too as a resident within the 50-mile radius of Indian Point. There's pros and there's cons to it, and obviously this issue a lot more acute after Fukushima. So let me go into one, which is the numbers. 20 million people in a 50-mile radius, by far the biggest population density around any nuclear power plant in America, let alone the world here. Speak to the issue that people around here have said, you just can't evacuate that number of people in a situation where literally as the wind blows here, people can be put in harm's way.
Okay, first let me sort of address the 50-mile issue, and I think that got a lot of legs as a result of the recommendation the U.S. government made to the citizens, American citizens living in Japan after the events of March 11th last year at Fukushima, where given the fact that we had very little information, pretty much all the information that we were getting was what the people were seeing on CNN, seeing smoke coming out of various reactor buildings at Fukushima, the fact that you had this tremendous tsunami and earthquake that affected the plant there, and given the fact that you had multiple reactors on the site, you potentially had spent fuel pools that at the time we thought could have been leaking and perhaps have no water in them whatsoever to provide cooling. The agency, in conjunction with its other federal partners, made a very conservative decision, but a very prudent one given what we knew and, more importantly, what we didn't know, to recommend to American citizens that they should evacuate if they live anywhere within 50 miles of Fukushima.
And just to be clear for the audience at home, they may have remembered that from March of last year. That was Kenny Yasko, who's the head of the NRC, gave the number 50 miles American citizens, in effect, get out of Dodge. It wasn't some bureaucrat with no knowledge of nuclear power.
That's correct.
This is the head of the entire Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the States.
Right, and the recommendation was made in support of the ambassador in Japan, who was seeking advice in terms of what do I tell the U.S. citizens living in Japan. And so it was a very prudent, very conservative decision that was made. I think as you look at the situation now that a year has passed, you may recall the Japanese government eventually moved their evacuation zone out to 20 kilometers, which is about 12 miles, which is analogous to our 10-mile emergency planning zone that we have around nuclear power plants in the United States.
Right now, somebody at home is going to say, hold on a second. Our own watchdog group here for the federal government when it comes to nuclear power is telling basically in Japanese or Americans in Japan, get out to 50 miles. And when it comes to our own citizens, never mind, it's only a fifth of that. Whether or not the facts bear it out, there's going to be a perception and probably a reality, God forbid we're in the situation, that people are going to say, wait a second, they're putting the industry before the public here. They told us 50 miles a year ago. Now all of a sudden they're telling us 10. Which one is it?
Yeah.
That's the overriding concern here, that safety is being put second instead of industry concerns.
Yeah, and nothing would be further from the truth in that regard, Rich. And the 10-mile EPZ that exists around nuclear power plants in the United States is a well-based, well-founded distance that we believe is a zone in which planning needs to be done on an ongoing basis and exercises conducted and so on. If in a very, very dire and unforeseen circumstance that there was a need to expand, a need to either evacuate or take protective actions outside of a 10-mile EPZ, that they could do that. They could expand things like traffic control or move decontamination centers further out. So the capability exists in every community responsible for radiological emergency planning to be able to do the appropriate decision making that if God forbid there needed to be some extension or expansion of that 10-mile EPZ, they could do that.
One of the other issues that came up is since Fukushima, they found fault lines right along Indian Point, right along Buchanan, New York. And again, confluence of events, people would have said near the Fukushima plant that nothing would happen or have to be the perfect storm. Obviously, we saw that. What kind of comfort could the public have at home that, hey, if Mother Nature, with an earthquake, with a fault line near the plant, were to act up, that we wouldn't have this situation unfold right here in the greater New York area?
We believe that the construction and design of Indian Point is very robust in terms of being able to withstand what could be an expected earthquake in this area. And all plants in the United States are designed and constructed to take into account the types of external events that have occurred in that area.
All right, and obviously we heard the same thing with Fukushima, and we saw obviously how that turned out.